All right. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking some time. If we can, I'd like to just start and go around and do some introductions. Let's see, what's the best way to do this? Let's start with Tommy, and then Steve, and then Audrey, and then Will.
Tommy Taylor, CEO of United Way of the Cape Fear area.
Steve McCrossan, Executive Director, NourishNC.
Audrey Hart, Executive Director for New Hanover Disaster Coalition.
Will Rikard, Executive Director for StepUp Wilmington.
All right, thank you all so much for joining us. Again, I appreciate you sharing your time with us. Before we get into the COVID-19 details, I want to hear a little bit from each of you about what you guys were dealing with before the global pandemic, whether that was hurricane stuff or just ordinary outreach work. Again, starting with Tommy, I know this is you're new in the position, but you're not a stranger to this game.
Mm-hmm.
What were you guys dealing with United Way before this all started?
So I would say, even before Florence, affordable housing, living wage, case management capacity, and mental health providers were all major issues that became exacerbated with Florence. Right now, they're much worse. I know our underemployment population is taking a huge hit. I'm sure Will can speak more to that than I can. But also, we've got newly unemployed. So unlike Florence, we've got a global crisis. So there's no well community to draw from. So there's a lot of development prospects that are off the table right now. But I would say that mental health, affordable housing, living wage are probably the biggest things.
Sure. Steve, how about you?
Yeah, so from NourishNC's perspective, before COVID hit, we're most known for the backpack program that feeds children every weekend and over all school breaks. Pre-COVID, we were at about 1,200 children. Now, since COVID has hit everybody, really, we're at about 1,650 children. So that program alone has seen a dramatic increase, but now our outreach programs are thousands of children. So definitely a huge increase for us. Pre-COVID at the regional level, though, we were doing well. 4.5 years ago when I took this job, 1 in 5 children were struggling with hunger in our region. Pre-COVID, that was down to 1 in 4. So there was some good news at the regional level for us. What we're hoping is that the long-term economic effects of COVID-19 don't change that number back to 1 in 5. So that remains to be seen.
Sure. Yeah. Audrey, hey, you're in the emergency command center, aren't you?
I am.
How are things there?
Busy. Every day we're just kind of shifting, and a plan is only as good of a plan until it's ready to throw it out and make a new one. So it's going well. But before COVID-19, we were still working with a lot of our partners. We're the long-term recovery group for the area. So we were still working with people that were trying to get back into their homes or get their homes repaired, find new apartment living, or get household items, right, to put in their furniture. So maybe rebuilding partners. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. It just, maybe rebuilding partners were able to provide the repairs in the homes and things like that, but they were missing the furniture and the things like that to go with inside of their home. Or they were able to do the inside of the home, but not the roofing. So we were helping coordinate the Florence recovery for that. And at the same time, work on mitigation and preparedness.
And now that we're sort of in pandemic mode, have you guys shifted? Are you still trying to handle the old stuff and the new stuff?
Yeah, we're still very much handling both. So unmet needs and case management, still meeting monthly to help meet those needs of people that are recovering. It looks different. Obviously, case management right now looks very different, but we're still meeting and working with folks to get them back recovered.
And Will, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, to start with, I think if you look at Wilmington, as an example, we had and still have a poverty rate of 23%, which is incredibly high. Hanover County, I think, is 17%. Brunswick, Pender are about the same. So both well above the national average. And that was going into this. That was going into the hurricane. And so we started with some pretty severe problems, which came from one, systematic racism, among many other factors that contribute to that number. I think, so we've, in the last 5 or 6 years, made a lot of success in getting people to work and also increasing the level of wage, which has gotten some people above that poverty line. And so we've had some good success. One, as a result of a good economy. Employers pay more in a good economy. The demand for hiring is greater, so that increases the people's ability to negotiate. So we've seen wages grow from an average of, say, under $10 an hour 3 years ago to over $12 an hour this past fiscal year, which is good. It's not where we need and want to be, but it's good progress. The median wage was still $11 an hour, which means half the people we see, make $11 an hour or below. So that's a good number of people basically working, yet living in poverty. And so we had made progress there. The worrisome thing for me now is what happens with that progress. A lot of those people who were working today aren't working. We know that over 20% of people who got jobs with us the last 2 years have lost their job due to this. We know another about 20% have been impacted through loss of hours or loss of wages because of COVID-19. And so you have 40% of the people that we serve who were negatively impacted, who have lost a job or lost wages or hours because of this. And there'll probably be more to lose work. So it's a little bit scary where we are. And I'm just hopeful that some of the federal programs with the Paycheck Protection allows some people to be hired back and continuity stays. At the same time, I'm not fully confident it's going to be like that. I anticipate there's going to be some pretty dramatic shift in the unemployment numbers, unfortunately.
Tommy, you mentioned that often when you have a disaster in one area, you can pull from the well, right? You have people who are less affected can chip in. With something like this that's kind of devastated the entire country economically, how does that change things?
From a fundraising perspective, there's a lot of really significant changes that happened fast. When the market shifted down, and I'm glad it's creeping back up. Most stock option gifts were off the table for sure, even if they were on their way to fruition. So that type of giving came off the table very quickly. The layoffs, absolutely. For a United Way that depends on workplace campaigns, layoffs always have an impact on our workplace campaigns, which is a great tool to support the nonprofits. I'd like it to be more robust than it is right now, but it's taken a small hit during this because of that factor. The other thing is, for something like Florence, I think most of us had access to resources, not what we would need for the long haul, but in a short period of time, a lot of resources came into the area. Often we had more resources than we had skilled labor to spend. Of course, they're running out, and recovery will be many, many years until it's done. We're still dealing with Hurricane Matthew, right now. So it's not necessarily enough resources, but it definitely was a big shot in the arm to our community from other communities that are doing well. For example, now we've got one big foundation that gave to United Way worldwide. Well, that's got to be spread thin. It's like, just not enough butter and too much toast is a good analogy there. So that's spread thin. I'm trying to take different approaches, looking towards the individuals that didn't lose their jobs but still got the stimulus, to see if they'd consider supporting their neighbors and friends who are now all of a sudden needing a hand up when they may not have before. But the need across the board is up, but it's not just here. And yes, it's going to take a big change in tactics and a big movement really to get through this together. I do believe that our community is strong enough and united enough to do it. We're just going to have to do it differently. I think folks like Steve and Will have had to figure that out really quickly, how their programs operate. I'm definitely looking at it more from a more long-term funding perspective, how we can support their innovations and their increased demands.
So, taking that, Steve, how have you been seeing things in terms of, a crisis that's kind of making it harder for some people to give, maybe?
Yeah, so, research from past incidents like hurricanes, tornadoes, etc., tends to show you that donations spike after an incident. Now, this is weird because this incident doesn't have a very quick beginning and an end like a hurricane does. But so typically what happens is for the first 30 days, donations soar, and then they decrease exponentially over the next 6 months and beyond, right? So we've definitely seen a 30-day surge, which is great, right? We have a very apolitical mission. We feed kids. People get behind that. So I'm not worried about today or tomorrow. I'm worried about the long-term effects. What does it look like in 6 months if we have a resurgence? I want to stockpile food right now for that, but we can't because the supply lines are so choppy. Food costs are up across the board. Meat, eggs, non-perishables are skyrocketing. So for us, it's about telling our story, getting out there and telling folks what we're doing. And what I tend to find is this community will get behind that. And you have a lot of great grassroots folks doing stuff where they're doing their own ring and runs and they're getting groceries for their neighbors. And so no one can do it alone. And I've seen a really cool patchwork of agencies, of people who had never done anything like this before, and they're organizing things. So I think we have a strong community. I agree with Tommy. And we made a lot of relationships and connections after Florence that are bearing fruit today. So I think that's really helped, that we didn't just walk away from Florence and not learn anything. I think everybody on this call learned a lot and is putting that to use now.
Sure. Audrey, that's I think a good question for you. Have you guys, how has things evolved at the Disaster Coalition since Florence?
Since Florence, a lot of things have, and I say a lot of things, but at the same time, I feel like certain things are probably slower than what I would like to. The things that Steve and Tommy both mentioned are the community relationships. And somebody from the state emergency management department always says during times of disaster is not the time to hand out business cards. And that very much held true for this community, in that we continue to stay in touch with one another and everything like that. And we meet monthly with purposeful meetings, both within the committees, but also the larger coalition. And so I guess the things that have evolved is just a better coordination of services, figuring out who does what and how, and figuring out where those service gaps are relatively quickly. And then because we already have those relationships, and if I don't have that relationship, maybe Steve does. And if I don't have it, maybe Will does or Tommy does. And so I'm able to call on partners and know that I can't know all things. The coalition can't know all things, but I probably know somebody else who does know something. So just connecting those pieces. And that's one way that the Disaster Coalition kind of is able to meet those service gaps and develop those relationships and meet the unidentified or unmet needs within the community. But at the same time, I don't know what I don't know. So if I don't know that there is a service gap or there is a need within the community, or if somebody within the coalition doesn't know, it gets hard to fill that need.
Gotcha. Well, going back to the idea of, how a nonprofit deals with sort of a long-term cash crunch, how does that look from your point of view?
I hope we don't have a cash crunch, but it's a good question. First, to go back to what Steve said, I think it's interesting. The first 2 weeks of this felt like, oh, we've done this before. It's like a hurricane. There's a crisis. And then after that period, you're like, wait a second, this is different. Like, what's happening? And so it's weird. I think I really wonder how you kind of know, in a crisis like this, especially an economic one, that typically people that we serve will suffer greatly. And then those who have, good paying jobs generally continue to do okay. It worries me a little bit that maybe this is different, that if you start to see layoffs of, of people who make above the median wage, for example, then you really get into, I think, some fundraising challenges and how do you raise the money to meet the need? Because we know we're going to see a dramatic increase in demand for service in terms of people looking for work. And so we're going to need more employees to be able to meet that need. And so the question comes back to what can we do to raise that money? Is it possible to raise that money in this environment? And so I think we're lucky, I know in hindsight, to be able to have a board and be able to plan and know that we have, we always plan to have 6 months of reserves in the bank. That's part of our operating procedures and plans. And so we do that. And so we feel comfortable we're in a strong position to be able to weather the storm. But there's certainly that uncertainty and what risk are we going to be willing to take to invest in people, to hire more, to be able to serve, at the same time depleting that cash while we do that, and if we do that. And it's going to be trying to strike a balance of meeting the need while at the same time we got to stay solvent. If we go away, I think a lot more people are hurt, and so we got to find that balance. And I don't know exactly what it is yet, but we've sort of held fire with fundraising because we don't necessarily think it's our time right now. There's other emergency with food and so forth, but that's like an immediate need. At the same time, we have an event coming up which actually was supposed to happen on Tuesday, where we raised 10% of our budget at a luncheon. And so we postponed that into June, and we're going to do just a virtual fundraising event. But that will be telling to see how successful that is. And hopefully people are in a position to give, and hopefully people give generously. But I just don't know. And I don't think we'll know until that time comes.
Yeah. So the last question I sort of wanted to go around the virtual table and ask is, no one's really clear about what the end game for COVID-19 is. I mean, we've heard speculation that there could be a second wave in the fall, or that this, virus could be with us in one way or another for years. And so in terms of long-term planning for, a pandemic that's not just going to hit us like a hurricane and blow away, how have you approached that? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, good question. So one of the things was we're trying to, like everybody, getting a reopening plan. What does it look like for us to get back to some sort of normal, whatever the new normal is? I don't know. And I look at like our staff. So our staff is 60% African American. The population we serve is 50% African American. We have people on our staff with pre-existing conditions. We know that people we serve have pre-existing conditions. There are already existing health disparities. So knowing that, and if this virus is still out there, how in the world do we go about operating in some sort of normal capacity, which means we get people together in a room, do stuff with those kind of risks. And so really trying to navigate that and figure out how do we go about this is sort of the next challenge. And I don't have the answer right now, but we're continuing to work through it. And we're going to need more insight and guidance to be able to get there. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of what was on my mind anyway.
I don't know if anyone has concrete answers, but I think, it's sort of important. Audrey, what does it look like from Disaster Coalition's point of view?
Sure. So right now, it's Hurricane Preparedness Week, right? So we're also looking at what is this going to look like for hurricane season, whether it's sheltering or mass feeding and points of distribution and things like that. So and last year we did a hurricane preparedness and recovery expo. So we're planning on kind of redrafting that plan to still be able to provide those resources and things like that, so that the community is prepared and knows that we are preparing for COVID-19 hurricane season. So we have started redrafting those plans and shelter plans for social distancing and different opportunities too, to make sure people know that we're still here for recovery, for hurricane recovery from Florence, like this, they don't feel alone or left out, or that this weight is yet another weight on their shoulders and on their backs, but that the community is still here and supporting them. So for COVID-19 in the future, it's going to be this similar to Hurricane Florence, doing an after action probably after a couple of resurgencies, and figuring out what are we learning from this again, to make sure that we're continuing to plan better, continuing to evolve our relationships and our preparedness as a community, and identifying those service gaps. And is it something that's there all the time, that this COVID-19 is just shining a spotlight on it? Or is this a gap because of COVID-19? More than likely, it's probably a systemic thing, but having those frank conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people have pointed out that COVID-19 has been kind of a sledgehammer and a magnifying glass.
Yeah.
Steve, what about from your point of view?
Yeah, I'll echo Will's comments. The first 2 weeks we came out sprinting really hard, and then because that was our hurricane mentality: go quick, get there, get moving. And then it was like, uh-oh, this is going to be a marathon, right? And so for us, I hate to say these two words together, but we too are looking at what if we have a hurricane during a COVID resurgence. And for us, that means stockpiling food. I have money to buy food and can't buy it. That's a very strange situation to be in. So we're hoping that the supply lines normalize, which I think they will soon. And then we want to stockpile food in 2 different locations in case we do get a hurricane and lose one facility. So for us, it's about getting ready now for the fall and assuming the worst and hoping for the best. The week the stock market crashed, we were supposed to launch a capital campaign to raise $1.5 million for the, if y'all know the old China King buffet on Market Street, we bought that in late winter, and we're going to demo it to build a new warehouse for our forever home. But the week we were supposed to start, this all happened. And so what does a capital campaign look like, trying to raise $1.5 million after all this? I don't know. But the blessing is we were able to turn that building into our drive-through. So we're doing no contact food distribution on that 2 acres out of that old Chinese buffet, which the coolers still work. So we have 4 operational coolers over there. And so that it's a strange blessing to have that building, and we'll figure out how to pay for it later on. But so for us, again, long-term thinking, tomorrow's easy. It's what does the fall look like?
Yeah. And tell me, how about for United Way?
So we're already looking at what a virtual campaign could be like. We've already got e-pledge options and that type of thing. But that's a direction that we needed to go anyway, and we're headed anyway. But we're sort of being tossed into it right now. I know we had a lot of short term, a lot of campaigns that were new that we were going to run this spring, and those have not happened. But we're going to try to turn those into pace setters. We're going to try to, depending on the current climate, do that in whatever way works for the company. But right now, we're fully prepared to try to launch in a virtual way, much like others have said. What's a fundraiser like that going to yield? I think I'm going to have to steer more towards instant gratification gifts than a lot of traditional, payroll deductions that we may normally get, and try to get more smaller donations, but also, focus in on the folks that still have the capacity and try to raise major gifts, because I see the strain on our system immense. As far as our office, we have one component to United Way that I'm not sure many people know about, but we've got a senior community service employment program where we employ low-income seniors. That was the first part of our operation that we shut down, but we're already looking at, phase 2, phase 3, how to reintegrate that in a safe way. So everything from, if there was a shared desk, making sure, there's separate phone receptacles, and how to reopen safely, which staff are more productive working from home, and how much space we actually need, and what that looks like are all considerations. But I think we're going to have to be flexible depending on how this goes. Certainly, the idea of a hurricane coming as well is something that we have to be prepared for. So, we're looking at, what, as Will said, this marathon is going to, or I believe maybe it's Steve, what this marathon is going to look like, how we need to change tactics and make sure we can still be a backbone for the nonprofit sector, because it's going to be needed more now than ever. So we're just going to recognize the current reality, redefine winning, and execute our plans.
Sounds good. So yeah, that's what we wanted to cover. I thank you all so much for sharing your time with us. I know, at least in our newsroom, there's a lot of our readers have, I think, been more aware of the at-risk communities in our region. Certainly the service industry is one place that the spotlight was pretty bright. A lot of people who, it's a vibrant industry. I used to work in it. Everyone loves restaurants. And I don't think a lot of people processed until now how close a lot of those people were to the poverty line, or the fact they were under the poverty line. Sort of the racial disparities in that industry and other industries. So I think going forward, there'll be, hopefully one silver lining to this will be a lot more public awareness about what you guys do and why it is that you guys have to do it. So again, I thank you so much for your time, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate the
Thank
positive
you. Good
notes.
seeing everybody. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, Ben.
Talk
Good to
soon.
see everyone.
Thanks. See y'all.